Hi guys, welcome back. So last weekend was Salute. We were there and we launched the latest issue of Wargames Soldiers and Strategy. That was issue 90, which covered sort of the second half of World War I as the theme. And it looked at a lot of technological innovations during that war. So things like airplanes and tanks and machine guns and how that kind of changed the face of warfare. So, you know, if you're more interested in that issue, I'll link it here and download below in the description box. So you can go to our web shop and check it out and purchase yourself a copy if you want. And to go along with that, I'm going to be painting for you today a late war World War I German model. This guy is by fittingly called Great War Miniatures. I think you can order them through the North Star website. If you have done any World War II Germans before, and if you're watching my channel, chances are you have, you probably are going to see an awful lot of similarities with how this guy looks compared to them. The German uniform, I think, underwent some not insignificant changes during the course of World War I, and this is a very requested figure. A lot of people have asked how to paint World War I Germans, and people have asked for both late war and actually early war Germans because of that uniform shift that occurred. So I'm going to start talking about the late war German now because that's what I've got. And then later on I'll try and get back and cover the early war uniform with its Pickelhaube and some of those kind of interesting things. But one detail that you do have on this late war uniform is the German helmet. You know, you can kind of paint it in this fairly standard dark green color, but they were also known to take their helmets during this period and paint them with this very bright, very graphic looking camouflage pattern, which is pretty simple to paint, but really, really striking. And I've always kind of wanted to try that out, kind of been looking forward to it as well. So I think that's going to be a really nice kind of detail that'll add sort of flavor and interest to what is otherwise a fairly, well, it's an involved uniform because there's a lot of equipment and stuff going on, but otherwise a fairly sort of dark, fairly drab uniform with, as I said, a lot in common with sort of later stuff from World War II. So as always, I'm starting off with all the paint colors that you're going to need for this model. It's a pretty nice limited palette this time, and of course this does not include whatever you're using to paint the model's face and hands. Okay, so I'm going to start off here by base coating the uniform. I'm going to be doing the pants and the jacket in the same color, though you could choose to slightly vary the tone on the two different parts. You see that pretty commonly because of just dye lots and stuff being different. The late war German uniform is generally a little bit more grayish, whereas the early war one tends to be more on the green side, so I'm going for the more gray look here. The base coat I'm using right now is Vallejo US Olive Drab. For my first highlight, I'm going to be applying a layer of German Field Gray World War II. That's probably going to sound familiar to you if you've seen any of my tutorials on painting World War II Germans, obviously. This is a color I'm very fond of for those uniforms. And honestly, I looked at a lot of pictures of these late war German World War I uniforms, and the color is very, very, very similar to what you see in World War II. So I don't feel too guilty about kind of using a similar color palette. So anyway, right now I'm just going to start by layering this color on. I'm going to be working again with thin paints and just kind of applying it kind of everywhere and then going back over and then kind of building it up in areas where I plan to have stronger highlights down the road. So even though I am going to be using colors similar to what I would in a World War II German uniform, I did want to kind of mix up the techniques for highlighting a little bit, just, to keep things fresh and maybe sort of give sort of a slightly different end result. So after applying my sort of initial highlight of just the field gray World War II, I'm going to be building now progressive highlights beyond that point, just by taking Deck Tan from Vallejo, which is, I must say, becoming fast one of my favorite colors from them, and I'm going to be using that to lighten the field gray World War II. At first, with this layer, I'm not going to put very much of it in, but as you'll see, that's going to sort of progressively increase. And kind of as I hinted to before, my third highlight is again just taking the color that I was working with before and just mixing in a bit more of the Deck Tan to get it lighter again. And I'm just, as I go up in tone, I'm really just sort of focusing on increasingly sort of small areas where I know there's going to be a lot of highlights on the uniform. See how I'm going for the knees and the cuffs and the tops of the arms and all those kind of good places like that. And I'm really making sure to leave some of those deeper colors down in the wrinkles and creases and under the arms, between the legs, things like that where not very much light is going to be hitting. Before I'm finished painting the jacket and pants, I'm going to apply 2 more layers where I repeat the process of adding in more and more Deck Tan. You don't want to go up to pure Deck Tan. Obviously, that's going to be way, way, way too light. So, ideally you just want a sort of this sort of palish green gray color, and you can do this very much to your taste as well. So as I said, there was a huge variance in the dye lots for fabric at this time in the uniforms, and also just wear and tear would cause fabric to get light and bleached out. So you can do different models differently, make the color sort of lighter on some and darker on others. You can even mix it up within one model. So you could say make your pants darker, so not highlight them as high, and then go ahead and highlight the jacket to a higher level, just to kind of simulate sort of those differences in tone and differences in the uniform fabric that you see very, very commonly. I'm now pretty happy with his uniform, so I'm going to move on to painting his bedroll and the sort of canvas, I guess, mess bag that he's carrying there. The mess bag tends to, I think, usually be sort of a canvas color always in this late war period. The blanket can vary. I've seen them sometimes be gray or blue-gray as well. I decided to do both in a brownish hue, just because I didn't really want any more gray or blue-gray in here, because I think I have enough of that with the uniform. So I thought, you know, a brown neutral would be nice, but my base coat on those areas right now is going to be German Camouflage Pale Brown, which is a nice light kind of shade, but it's a very sort of cool brown, which I think complements the look of the uniform very well, and the colors I used in that already. And now, because I'm really a big fan of trying to use the sort of the same colors over and over in painting a figure so that you get this nice cohesiveness, I'm going to be using that trusty deck tan that I used to lighten my uniform, and I'm going to be using it to lighten the brown for the bedroll and mess bag as well. And it's a very straightforward process, really. I'm just taking the German Camouflage Pale Brown, and I'm just going to be mixing in kind of progressive layers of deck tan here to get sort of lighter and lighter shades. I'm going to be kind of applying that onto the surfaces. Obviously, you're going to want to see the lighter colors more towards the top where more light is hitting, and with the bedroll particularly, there's lots of folds and wrinkles and creases there, and you obviously are going to sort of want to highlight along the tops of those and try to leave the darker color sort of down in the folds so that you get, you know, a nice sense of dimension and contrast and everything like that. And now I'm just going to apply 2 more layers with increasing amounts of the deck tan mixed in. For the top layer, you can almost go to pure deck tan if you want, though I recommend that you then apply that really sparingly for like really strong emphasis on some of the really tight creases and folds in that bedroll in particular, and maybe as sort of an edge highlight along the sort of the seams on the side of the satchel, stuff like that. You want that really strong contrast, but when you've got a fairly dark base and a fairly light top highlight, you want to make sure that top highlight is used in a very sparing way. This particular soldier has got a mess tin kind of in the middle of his bedroll there, and the color used for this is pretty similar to what you'll see on World War II Germans, as far as I could tell. I did this in a very dark green color, so I base coated with Vallejo extra dark green, and I just did some very, very quick highlights just by lightening it slightly, again with that deck tan. It doesn't take very much. Just a teeny drop of that into your darker paint is enough to kind of build up a few very quick highlights on that piece of gear. Next, I'm going to be base coating the black areas, and there's actually not all that much black on this model, certainly compared to what you would expect from a World War II German uniform. I'm going to be doing the boots in black leather, though I've actually seen pictures where they had brown leather boots, so that wouldn't even necessarily be something you have to do. And I'm also going to do the sheath for his bayonet in black. I'm then going to be just highlighting my black leather in the sort of way that I usually do. So I've got some Vallejo silver gray, and I'm going to start out by just mixing a very small amount of that into my black to get a sort of a very subtle first light gray, or dark gray, I should say, highlight on the boots. And then from there, I'm just going to, carefully build it up, just very gradually adding in very, very small amounts of the silver gray, because you don't want it to get too bright too quickly. You always want to go for fairly subtle transitions on anything black, because if you don't, then it's going to end up looking more gray than black, obviously, and I certainly am known to make that mistake and go too hard on the light colors. When you're finished, you can take a very light gray shade, almost pure silver gray if you want maybe a little bit darker, and use that to apply some very thin sort of edge highlights, like on the heels, along the edge of the bayonet scabbard, along just little bits on the boots and the leather to give the indication of sort of shininess. If the the surface is otherwise very, very dark and not highlighted too extremely. If you then apply some very bright light highlights just in a few places, then you're going to get that effect of shininess on the leather rather than it looking like it's just gray and kind of not that shiny, but just a lighter colored leather. His water bottle cover is also kind of a grayish green shade, so I just really quickly base coated that with the German Field Gray World War II, and then I went ahead and to highlight it, I first mixed in a little bit of the black just to get a slightly more gray color first, and then I went and added in the silver gray again to kind of get lighter shades and just kind of highlighted over that, so that the end result is you just cut kind of a slightly mid-gray looking kind of greenish cast type item there. Alright, now I'm going to be base coating the leather. There's actually a lot of brown leather on this model, and that's one thing I really like about it. As I mentioned earlier, on World War II German uniforms, a lot of the leather equipment tends to be black, whereas in World War II, it looked like they used a lot more brown leather. So all the pouches and straps and things that you might normally paint black, if this is a later period German, you can go ahead and do in brown. So I'm base coating all of those right now with my favorite color, German Camouflage black brown, because that's always a really nice base for leather. And there are a ton of sort of leather straps and things like that on this particular model. You've got the shovel cover, bits of the bayonet, you know, all the straps holding the blanket and the water bottle and on his helmet even in place. So there's a lot of things to cover there, so make sure you don't forget anything. For my first highlight on the leather, I'm going to take the German Camouflage black brown and I'm going to mix a bit of saddle brown into it, because I observed, looking at pictures, that the brown leather that you saw the Germans using here was often a sort of a reddish cast. So, you know, sometimes you have a more brownish leather, but this often seems to have a very rich red tone, which I actually really like. That's kind of my favorite color of leather, especially on these kind of uniforms, because I think it really sort of livens and brightens everything up. So this layer, it doesn't have too much of the saddle brown mixed into it yet, but I'm just going to start going back again over all these leather areas now and very sort of almost thinly applying layers of it. As always with leather, be sure you start out towards the edge and kind of work inward, and after you've applied one thin light layer, you might want to go back in and sort of build up this color a little bit more strongly in certain areas, especially where there's light hitting or you think there might be some extra wear on that leather. I'm then going to repeat that same process, but now just using pure saddle brown. It's a pretty strong, intense color, so make sure you thin the paint down plenty first, because that way you're going to get a better range of tones and stuff in your leather. Keep working from the outside in, because the trick with leather is always to make it look good, is that you try always to preserve some of that dark base coat in there, and you take advantage of the paint's transparency to make sure some of that shows through. If you just completely cover up your base and none of it shows through anywhere on the leather, it's not going to look as much like leather. It's going to look just more like some just generic brown surface. For the next highlight on the leather, I took some of the German Camouflage pale brown and I mixed it into the saddle brown, and I'm going to now just go over and apply it to all of those areas again. At this point, I'm really focusing on kind of giving the leather a look of shininess, so I try to apply this with that in mind, putting these light colors where I think a light would be hitting, or where you would get sort of a sheen on the leather, anywhere like that, or in areas where I think there might be some wear and tear. You really want to focus this on sort of the edges of your pieces, and, you know, don't pull it inward too much, because you don't want that center to get too light. And I probably shouldn't have to say this, but I will anyway, make sure when you're doing this kind of fine detail work, all these little straps and bits, you use a small brush. I'm working with a number 0. You'll just get a lot better control. If you feel like you want your leather to have an extra bright edge highlight shine in a few places, especially on those straps, you can just grab some of that deck tan again and use it to lighten the color from the last step, and that's what I'm doing here. And I'm just applying it very sparingly along some very sort of sharp edges and things like that. Okay, so this next step is going to require a little bit of clarification. The early war German uniform had these kind of bits of red piping around the cuffs, the collar, down the opening in the front, things like that. And that was basically eliminated in the later model jacket. It became plainer. There wasn't very much piping on it at all. And I know I'm painting a late war German here, so theoretically there should not be this red piping on his jacket, but from looking at the jacket, it seems as if he might actually be wearing the earlier war style, and I'm judging that based on his cuffs. He's got this sort of 3-button placket on the cuffs of his jacket, which is something which I think it seems to only be on the earlier war models. So based on that, I've decided to apply red piping everywhere, and we're just going to assume that this guy has an older jacket. He's a veteran or something. All I'm doing here, I've just got the paint real thin. I've got a number 0 brush, and I'm going to cut a fine line around the cuffs and the collar and all those areas, first using Vallejo Black Red, and then I'm just going to go back over it with Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet. Nothing more complicated than that. You just have to be careful and use, good brush control and detail, and you may need to get a couple layers of that bright red on there to get enough intensity in places, but it's such a fine, thin area, you don't need to build up a lot of layers of red paint or anything like that. Okay, now I'm going to handle the wood areas on this model, which basically include the stock on his rifle and the handle of his shovel. I'm base coating those areas right now to start off with using some Vallejo Leather Brown. In order to highlight the wood, I'm going to go ahead and grab some Vallejo Tan Yellow, and I'm going to mix that into my Leather Brown. And for the first highlight, I'm not going to put too much in because you've got a big difference there between the dark leather brown and the fairly light tan yellow, so start slow. And then I'm just going to apply 2 or 3 progressive highlight layers there to those, building it up gradually. If I were you, this yellowish color, you probably can get away with making the shovel handle a little lighter wood, and you may not want to do that so much on the rifle stock. Honestly, these rifles were often pretty dark wood and actually often made of a more reddish or brownish wood. But in this case, because I used that sort of red leather, red-brown color a lot already on the model, I wanted to do something that would really look distinct from it and not too similar. So that's why I'm going for the more yellow cast on all the wood bits in this figure. Alright, so now it's time to do the really fun part of this model, and one of the things that makes these late war Germans distinct, and that's the sort of helmet camouflage that you see sometimes. You can obviously omit this step and just paint your helmet a dark green color, but this is a lot more fun in my opinion. To base coat, I'm using 3 different colors here. That yellowish shade you see is a mixture of the tan yellow that I've darkened a little bit with the leather brown. Then you've got that saddle brown shade there, which I made by taking saddle brown and darkening it a little bit with the leather brown too. And finally you've got a green, and I made that by taking the extra dark green and mixing in some German camouflage bright green. So with those 3 colors, I'm now going to proceed to apply sort of a geometric pattern to the helmet. It's kind of like a patchwork, and I think that's the easiest way to paint it. So you want to just start out with one color block, and then you're going to put another color adjacent to it, and sort of just build, and then sort of put them together like that. The only thing you want to make sure is you don't have 2 like color blocks touching one another. Well, I mean, actually I think I've seen examples where that does happen, but personally I think it looks nicer when each color touching the next is different. So you can, and there's a lot of freedom in how you paint these. You can go for more angular shapes, but I've seen examples where the shapes are rounder and more organic looking. There's not so much one right way as you are likely to find, say, when you're painting World War II German camouflage.
once I've blocked in those areas with the darker tones, I'm going to go back in and apply a highlight. So to highlight my yellow areas, I'm now using pure tan yellow. To highlight my brown areas, I'm using pure saddle brown. And to highlight the green yellow areas, I'm using pure German camouflage bright green. Pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, any areas where I think I want it a little bit darker, like where that helmet sort of curves, the flange, I'm going to try to leave a darker shadow there. And I'm going to build up those brighter colors, especially more on the top of the helmet, because, you know, more light's going to be hitting and it's going to be stronger. And this has the added benefit when you apply this of not only adding your highlights, but because you're probably not going to perfectly fill that color all the way out to the edge, it's going to add this extra little bit of dimensionality and sort of shading to the color blocks. But one nice thing is, while you're doing this, you won't have to worry at all too much about the sort of the divisions between the color blocks being too neat. So if you're a little sloppy with that, it's not important, and I'll show you why in just 1 minute. And here you go. The reason why you can be pretty fast and loose when you're painting your color blocks is that there is always sort of a dark dividing line in between them. So, you know, once you've painted all of the different squares on, you're going to go back in, and I used a mixture here of black and German camouflage black brown, which I made sure was nice and thin so it flowed very well. And now I'm just going to carefully add some lines in between all of those squares. And you don't have to be perfectly neat in this either. If some lines are thicker and some are a little thinner, that's not a big deal. These helmets, I think, at least in some cases, were almost a handmade thing, so they were even just painted on sort of after the fact. So, you know, obviously in that case, you're not going to sort of have a perfectly neat factory finish. The last thing I'm going to be doing is painting the metal on his gun, his bayonet, and on his shovel, and any other areas like that you might have. I just made a base coat here by mixing black with Vallejo Air gunmetal. I'm keeping it pretty dark here to start out with. I'm then going to go ahead and highlight it just by mixing more of my gunmetal into the base and sort of building it up a little bit. And I will apply that, and then I'll finish with one layer of just pure gunmetal on areas where I want a whole bunch of shine. Don't let your gun bits get too shiny. You probably want to keep that more on the dark or metal side. And I did not show that in this video, but keep in mind, if you're painting the earlier pattern German jacket, I believe that the buttons on that you see are kind of going to be brass. So I just base coated those with the leather brown, and then really quickly went over them with some Army Painter Greedy Gold. But they're such small areas, you can just do that how you want, and it probably won't have too much effect. Okay, so here is our finished late war World War I German soldier. I enjoyed painting this guy. He felt very familiar to me, and then in other ways quite different. I mean, in the sense, I've painted very many World War II Germans, and I'm pretty at home with their uniform, and this was quite alike, but there were some things that were different and I found more interesting. Like, I really like the brown leather that's used here in World War I, and you know, as I said, you get black leather a lot more in World War II, and I actually think the brown leather with that green-gray makes for a much more attractive combination. And that was fun to paint for me. And of course that helmet, I mean, that's just really cool looking. It's so graphic, and it's got this very sort of abstract art quality about it. And compared to painting even fairly simple World War II German camouflage, it's really quite simple and easy to work out. And it makes the model just look really interesting. It adds this kind of cool, kind of funky focal point to the whole thing. So I really enjoyed that. If you're doing a earlier war German, I should say, as I talked about this a bit earlier, and that the earlier jacket has that red piping, whereas the later jackets usually do not. I'm still not sure if I got that 100% right, but even if I didn't, hopefully sort of showing how to paint the piping will help you out if you are working on one of the earlier war models. The other thing I would recommend if you're doing an earlier war German, go for a slightly greener green shade. Use like German uniform, for example, because that's a more greenish color, and that seems to have been more common earlier on in the war, and it got progressively kind of grayer and closer to the World War II uniform, in color at least, as time progressed. So if you enjoyed this video, of course, please like it and share it. Leave me comments with what you thought. I always like to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't gotten a chance to do so already. So that's all for now, and I will see you next time.